What is up, everybody? Another week. Hard to believe we're already on week number 6 of NLL Weekly. Wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, iHeart, basically anywhere you can go to find a podcast, you can find us. Still working our way through the Apple saga, so hopefully we'll have a chance to get on Apple Podcasts here sooner rather than later. But of course, if you can't get us on any of those formats, you can always check us right here on YouTube. Again, NLL Weekly is the location of the show. You can watch us tape live at 7 o'clock roughly every Wednesday. Or, of course, they're always archived after the fact. So definitely appreciate any of the support and patronage that you give us. Please make sure you like and subscribe. That always helps the channel. So we appreciate, again, anything that you can do to help out the NLL Weekly podcast. Tonight on the show, we're going to have Anthony Wayne head coach Andy Brungard on to talk about his team as they get set to take on the Whitmer Panthers, maybe the biggest game of the league slate so far. As we get ready to enter that divisional play. The crossover games are done. Those ended last week. And now we're on to the divisional play. And the nice part about this, if you're a team that has struggled during the crossover games, which unfortunately, Dan, is many of the Cardinal teams, the beauty is that championship chase doesn't start until this Friday. So anything that happened the previous 5 weeks, you can kind of put aside because it's all about the next 5 weeks.
You know, it's a coaching cliche that always gets trotted out, especially around this time as we all kind of roll back into conference, is that once you get into conference play and you are in your conference, the way you have to think of it is you are 0-0 and every week matters. And that's where we're at now, despite the fact we're thinking we're more than halfway through the season already too. But mentally, that's the best way to approach this. Even if you had success in the first half of the season, it sort of also kind of helps to, reset the mindset and go, all right, we took care of business out of the league. Mm-hmm. Now it's time to refocus. We may even have to buckle down even more, but now is the time to focus on that league championship.
Yeah, it should be interesting. The next 5 weeks, critical for who's going to win that Cardinal, who's going to win that Buckeye division. So really excited to see how that all transpires. And one person that's going to have a huge hand in that we'll talk to in just a second. But before we do, want to say thank you to Car Stereo One. They specialize in providing high-quality audio system speakers and accessories for your vehicle. A wide range of products and expert advice can help you upgrade your car's sound system and enhance your driving experience. They also work on boats. They work on bikes. They work on whatever kind of vehicle you can have. They do wraps. They do custom wheels, custom interiors, speakers and subwoofers, car stereos, remote starters, and window tints as well. So again, make sure Car Stereo One is your place to go to upgrade your ride whenever you need to. 3120 Central Avenue is where you can find them at the phone number 419-474-5553 and also online at carstereo1.com. And at this time, let's bring in our guest on the evening, and he is the head football coach of the Anthony Wayne Generals, Andy Brungard. Andy, thanks for doing this tonight. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Definitely a great backdrop. You're one of the few that has actually gone outside to do this, so we do appreciate you bringing a little bit of nature to the show. It's something that we don't have a whole lot of when we're cooped up in these dank offices a little bit.
Listen, if I got 5 minutes to throw the ball with my dog in the yard, I'm going to take advantage of it. So,
fair enough. I wanted to talk to you, because it's obviously a big week for your team. You and I have talked in the past. We always have good conversations. And the thing that stuck out to me about your team last year after Whitmer played you guys, obviously things did not go the way that you wanted to in that game. I don't think anybody is surprised to hear me say that. But what really struck me about your team was how resilient they were after that week, because you go on the road to Findlay the next week, and I'm sure you heard the whispers all week leading up to that Findlay game last year. Well, they're going to be 0-2 in the Buckeye division. If they lost to Whitmer, they're probably going to go on the road and lose to Findlay. You guys gave Findlay their only division loss last year. Talk about the resiliency of this team and the culture, because I know that not necessarily you're focused on what happened last year, but that culture carries over to this year with some of those same guys. So the resiliency on that team and kind of what the culture has been with that group last year.
Yeah, that's probably one of my, just as a coach, one of my best memories. We lost Win Sharp. So obviously the receiver that's getting playing time right now at BT, and that's just how big time he was. We lost 5 defensive starters. I mean, we'll be honest, we got beat up coming out of Whitmer. And, when you talk about that culture piece, I I joked with our building principal today. Sometimes I'm blown away just about how confident our kids are in themselves and what we do, because we had to have a next man up mentality. Everybody trusted in what we were saying, and everybody believed in it, and it just went. And that's something unfortunate. I had a very similar talk this year about 2016. We hadn't had a winning season in 4 years, and in 2016, that I always said to that class, they righted the ship. And
Sure.
I think since 2016, when that culture took place, that belief in themselves and in how we do things has kind of been. I'm very fortunate that our kids have kept that belief over the last 9 years.
Well, and you mentioned from day one, the thing that people probably don't remember is you guys have had to do it the hard way in a lot of years, because I can't tell you how many years it felt like where you guys lost the starting quarterback first week of the season or second week of the season, and you're running different guys out there. Evan Brown comes to mind, like just different guys, whatever you had to do to get a win. And obviously some guys weren't even quarterbacks to begin the year, but you did whatever you had to win. And I think it goes back to kind of what you said, establishing that culture from day one. It's kind of been something that's carried over every year, because it seems like you guys have some hurdle you have to get to the playoffs and have a good season.
Yeah, when things like that happen, that means you have really good assistant coaches. I've always been fortunate to have great guys on my staff. When things like that happen, we have a full backers program. It's our parents boosters club. Those things don't happen by accident, and I don't want to take any of the credit for it. I'm just fortunate that everybody has the same belief. Everybody, is moving in the same direction, and we all support one another. So it's honestly just the fortunate part of coaching in a community, a school like this.
Well, you talk about community, and something that I always think is a really nice compliment to a head coach is when some of his former players want to come back and coach with him. And you have two on staff this year, and Bryce Boyer and Mason Alberts. How have they adjusted to the coaching game? And also, what does it mean to you when some of your guys who have played for you want to come back and coach with you?
They're a great compliment for each other. I think you can probably figure it out, right? We have a tight end, first team All-Ohio middle linebacker, and Bryce Boyer. And when you see him, even on the sideline, sometimes he's wearing a cutoff hooded sweatshirt, and he's the one that wants to headbutt you with your helmet on and get everybody jacked up. And then we have a really calm voice in Mason Alberts. And both of them playing different positions in our program and different positions in college. That's how well they complement each other. They have a really soft voice when they need it, and then that really intense get after it. I'm going to headbutt you to get us motivated when we need to get fired up and have enthusiasm. And to have guys that want to come back and coach in our program, again, I don't get to take credit for that. They're teachers too. They want to teach in our community.
Sure.
They want to spend time with kids in our community, and they're just proud to grow up in Anthony Wayne.
When you're putting a staff together, I always think it's really important to have a good mixture of young and older veteran staff guys. Is that, in your mind, kind of having a good balance of that pretty important to kind of keeping a staff? Because I think the new guys bring different ideas. Obviously, the old guard have been there before. They've been through a lot of those trials and tribulations, so they know when to panic and when not to. Is that balance usually a pretty good area that you focus on?
I think if you talk to most coaches, the hardest thing to do right now is to just find good coaches.
That's absolutely true. Yes, you're correct.
It doesn't matter how old or how young they are. It's just hard to find good ones. And I have from day one refused to put just a warm body out there. I'd rather go without, because I think that does a disservice to your kids and what you're trying to do. Again, I'm very fortunate. We have someone named Leon Eggleston Jr., played at Southview, played at Wayne State. He's about 26. He joined our staff. So we have 3 younger guys with the 2 former players. And then we have guys like Jeremy Rowe, who was the head coach at Southview. Him and I have known each other for years. He's our O-line coach. Joe Horn, who's been coaching football collegiately for 15 years. And Adam Jungo, who's been coaching football for 15 years. So we are fortunate that we have a good mix. The younger guys like to bring the energy,
Sure.
Bring some fresh ideas that they've had the collegiate game. Then you're absolutely right. You have those other guys that are just a little bit older, a little bit wiser, and kind of mentor the young ones as they go. So we're fortunate to have a balance. Having a balance is a lot more fun. It's great in the coach's office when everybody can kind of throw things at each other. But to answer your question, yeah, it's great to have a balance, but it's even more important just to have good ones to find.
What do you think that is? Because you were a young guy at one point, and you're right. I've heard the same thing from a lot of coaches where it's not even just about, as you said, finding someone who fits what you do or someone who meshes well. It's just about finding somebody who does a good job. What do you think it is? Is it the time commitment, do you think? Because obviously things have changed even since you probably got in the game, where the time commitment, even back to probably, I'm assuming you're about the same age, as I am, where it wasn't a year-round sport. It wasn't necessarily where you were doing things 7-on-7 all the time. And the commitment for the level of, and not that anybody ever gets into high school coaching to get rich, but let's face it, it's never commensurate with the amount of time you have to put in. Do you think it's that, or do you think it's just a matter of, again, it's just a huge time commitment for guys, period?
The burnout is definitely real.
Yeah.
Especially when you talk about, I think the most turnover I have from coaches are guys that had really young kids that could do it when their kids were younger, but now that their kids are getting into sports,
Sure.
youth sports, it's harder for them to keep up with what's asked of them. I mean, I can tell you, my son played a 7th grade football game today, and I had to miss his game. And I think to ask other people to sacrifice that is a lot. So,
yeah,
that's the biggest thing, is asking guys to miss time with their families. So that turnover, and you're right. I mean, the burnout's real. Especially, I'm pretty fortunate that I think this is my 19th year, and I've been a part of one losing season between Perrysburg and here, and winning makes it easier. So I think you have a little bit more longevity with programs that have a lot of success. Because I'll tell you, when you're putting in a ton of time and you're not winning games, and that's not what it's all about. But that makes the season a lot longer and a lot more difficult. So I've been fortunate that I've been around success in a couple different programs, but I think just sacrifice from family and burnout after a number of years makes it difficult.
The thing that I always laugh at, and you probably feel this way a little bit. You guys, your school is such a unique school in the sense that you kind of get lumped in with Whitmer and Perrysburg and Findlay as like these 4 giant schools that are in Northwest Ohio. And the funny thing is, you're kind of a victim of your own success because, yeah, you guys are you're not necessarily the biggest or smallest. You're kind of right in the middle, but it's funny because the stuff that Findlay and Perrysburg and Whitmer can do, to platooning, some of that different kind of stuff, a little bit harder for you guys to do just because of the size of school that you are. Does it kind of make you laugh a little bit sometimes when everyone's like, oh, yeah, you just lump them in with Findlay, Perrysburg, and Whitmer because they're successful versus like looking at the actual logistics of it?
It's funny that you say that, because I've had this conversation over the summer. I find it amusing. I won't say any names or schools.
That's fair.
But when they're like, man, we got to play Whitmer this year. Man, we got to play Perrysburg this year. In which I'm like, we're the same size as you guys, and we're in this conference. Like, you're not going to see us complaining about it. But I give that, to our credit to our kids. Our kids want to play those games. No, I don't think anybody wants to play games and say, we're just going to roll through the schedule,
Sure,
or we're just going to win these games. And to say it's unfair, I don't think anything's unfair. You're dealt with the hand that you're given, and I think that's what makes us special. That's what I love about being here, is the kid that I get to watch in the 6th grade youth foundation. I got to figure out how to get him ready to beat Whitmer and to beat Findlay and to beat Perrysburg. And instead of seeing it as a disadvantage, I always look at it as an advantage if I get to invest in this kid for 5 or 6 years to get him ready to do, whatever we have to do to win a title. So it's definitely something to be proud of, I think, for us, that we're lumped in that category. But we always see it as an opportunity and not as a disadvantage.
It's always funny to me, though, because you're right. I think a lot of people look at it and just assume that because you guys have been uber successful since you took over the program, that you're the same size school. And reality, that's not the case. And it always makes me chuckle a little bit. And kind of, as you said, when you have those crossover games and you look at the Cardinal division, it's not like you guys are that far off from qualifying to be one of those schools that kind of flip flop back and forth. So it always makes me laugh to a degree, because I think people would be surprised to see that sometimes your numbers aren't probably where you want them to be. And Anthony Wayne, the district, has a lot of different sports, a lot of different activities that people can be involved in. It's not like where you've got this huge pool of kids to pull from. It's a little bit more of a finite pool out there. And it's a lot harder, I think, sometimes just assume that because you guys are successful, that somehow qualifies you to be a big school on top of it.
I will tell you, that's probably the most fun, right? I mean, as a coach, that's got to be the most fun thing of, how do we figure this out and compete? Especially if sometimes people see it as you have a disadvantage or view you differently. I don't think there's anything more fun than that as a coach.
Well, and again, we go back to the resiliency that we talked about with that group last year. And I think that's exactly how your kids have embraced it as well. Want to talk about Grant Kinney. He's been definitely terrific for you guys, committed to go to Colgate. your program, your offense is not always one that I would say is one where you're going to see kids throw it 45, 50 times a game. It's not an air raid style. So it's not
Right.
always easiest to get a quarterback recognized, but Grant has been able to do that. What has he done over the course of his career? And also, what does he mean to your program?
Hey, the only thing I'll argue with you on is I think he's our fourth first-team All-Ohio QB. So we might not be air raid, but they get on the board and get recognized. I think watching Grant when he was in junior high, he would take over games with his legs. He would run. And as you watched him, you're like, man, if we can figure out the passing game behind his vision of being able to run the ball, he can be really special. And I think you saw early on in his career, we're going to give him the plays he's comfortable with, the QB sweeps, the QB powers, etc. And then try and add as we can as he's gotten older. And I mean, our offensive coordinator, Joe Horn, he's a wide receivers coach from the collegiate level, and that's what he loves. That's what he wants to do. So for him and I to balance and put together the game plan for Grant, now we're at a point where Grant has a full understanding of everything, pass and run. And I will tell you, we could easily move him to running back, and he has some of the best vision I've seen.
Yeah.
And I think everybody who's ever played us or watched us knows if we get stuck in a situation, we're going to run QB power. I mean, there's no secret to it. But Grant being able to throw the ball, working with Brad Maynler in the offseason, and then obviously making that his mission in the recruiting game, he wanted to be a quarterback. He didn't want to be an athlete.
Sure.
And I think that's what's making him special this year is if you look at his numbers, he's right now throwing for over 100 and running for over 100. So he's really got a good balance this year.
And it's a situation where I know when you came in, because prior to your time, Craig Smith ran the wing T, and they ran a lot more triple options type of offense. And when you came in, there was no question you guys were going to spread things out and you weren't going to necessarily run the same thing. But in a way, you've kind of kept that fabric through that thread of again, it's not triple option, but you're still using the quarterback in the run game. It's not strictly just the situation where, like I said, you drop back and pass and throw 50 times a game. You're asking your quarterback to be able to run the football. And that's not just unique to Grant. I mean, that's been all the way along since you've started as the head coach there.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting next year when my son's the quarterback because I got to convince him to run like Grant. But it's been something I'll never forget. My first practice, we decided we're going to warm up just by throwing hitches. Like, guys, just a really easy hitch. I watched the kids drop it, step on it, and trip over it all in one play. And we kind of were like, okay, obviously we have to run the ball no matter how many times we want to throw it. So, yeah, we've always had a good balance of quarterbacks that have good athletes that have been able to run it. But it's also been fun to watch the evolution of kids that can actually play receiver and can make plays downfield too.
Trio of running backs who are phenomenal. Obviously, Braden's kind of the guy that everybody talks about, but Crew does a nice job for you. Roman does a nice job for you. Obviously, with the amount of guys that play both ways, but then also the fact that you do like to run the football, you've got to have a balance of a couple of guys that can help carry you through a season because guys get banged up, things get tough as the season goes on. That running back room is pretty special for you guys this year.
Yeah, it's interesting. Braden's like our breakaway guy. He can take any play. He's really good as a receiver out of the backfield too. Crew's actually kind of our tough back that goes in and gets tough yards for us. And then Roman's kind of that in between. He can do a little bit of both. So anytime you have three running backs, you're very fortunate. So last week, Braden couldn't play. And then Roman and Roman and Crew actually came in and did a nice job for us to still establish the run game. So you're very fortunate when you can put three running backs in the backfield and they all kind of give you a little bit of a different look.
Well, and if you want to make it to week 14, week 15, you have to have depth there. And that's something I'm sure you guys, with the runs that you've made over the years, understand more than anybody, that guys just get banged up. I mean, you just get physically beaten up as the season goes on. It's just kind of a victim of what happens on the field. And depth is so crucial to be able to make those deep runs.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'll be honest, as a coach, to be able to not flinch when whatever kid runs in there, know that they're going to be good. That's huge for even our offensive line and our quarterbacks to know, if one kid goes down or one kid needs a breather and nobody falls off. And that just keeps your confidence going as the season goes on.
Love the offensive line too. That's an area where you guys have some big boys. Obviously, Braden Cole's the first one that everybody talks about, but I think all along that offensive front, you have a really gritty and tough offensive line. And that's not something that I would say size wise, you guys have always had the biggest of offensive lines, but that also speaks to, I think, the job you've done at attracting talent to that district of bringing some of those bigger guys in. That offensive line, though, it obviously has to start up front with them as as much as you guys like to run the football.
We've had Owen Palmer play center for us. He was a first team all district center last year. And he's somebody, like you said, well, we talked earlier about investing in kids over the course of 6 years. He was a 175-pound freshman who's a 230-pound center, and he's done a great job getting himself physically ready to play for us. Max Grabarchuk is young. He's another one. He's a 180-pound sophomore, and now he's a 220-pound junior. So, you can talk about Braden Cole or Aiden Lohmeyer, even Daniel Wing. Those guys are just tough kids that get invested in. Here's the plane you have to set forth in the offseason to get yourself ready. And they believe in it and do a good job following through in it.
What is crucial, or what do you guys do to kind of beef up those guys? Is it just kind of off-season weight room stuff? Or, I mean, I guess trying to put 40 pounds on a guy in an off-season is certainly not the easiest thing to do. I know how to do that, and you just eat really poorly. But to do it right is a little different.
You and me both. Listen, I can share the diet plan. The problem is me following it. We do have a diet plan that we give our kids based on their position groups. Obviously, I have suggestions of this will work if you follow it right. And we've had a lot of kids through the years that have followed it. We lift 4 times a week, just as an opportunity to try and put as much muscle on as we can. December through February, our main focus is the weight room. And then in the spring, we start adding more agility and sprint work. So we try and pack those pounds on for about 3 months, kind of like that hibernation season. And then we'll shed some of it off in the spring. But we just try and get our kids as big, as strong as possible with obviously what they're eating and when they're eating, and then as many times as we lift throughout the winter.
One of the other things I love that you've done, and you and I have actually talked about this before in the past, is how many of your kids play at least one other sport. And football is probably the one that doesn't necessarily always lend itself to specialization, but we've seen over the time, especially recently, where a lot of kids will focus on one sport, but that's not the case. I don't know that programs, unfortunately, would be able to survive out in Anthony Wayne if everybody was a single sport athlete. But you've had a lot of kids who have gone and been great basketball players or baseball players or wrestlers or whatever the case may be. Why is it so important to you to make sure that those kids end up doing other sports beyond just playing football?
I mean, first of all, we have an offensive lineman right now that his feet are slow. He has trouble with leverage. Marty in his ear, he's got to learn how to wrestle, use your hands, fight with leverage, move your feet. We have kids that struggle sometimes with agility. It's perfect to play basketball. I mean, there are so many benefits from playing other sports that kind of open your eyes how to do things on the football field, whether it's how to take an angle at lacrosse and learning how to take a pursuit angle, like Braden Gardner, learning that burst, that breakaway speed from running track. There's just so many different things you do in other sports that correlate into being successful on the football field. I don't know why you wouldn't take advantage of it. Because for me, I think it's one thing about Anthony Wayne I appreciate. I have a lot of respect for the other coaches in our program. There are other coaches I want them to go hear their voice and what those coaches are teaching and what they're trying to instill in them. And I think to have that level of trust, and then obviously the skills that they're learning in other sports, just makes you better as a program.
And I think the confidence carries over too, because a lot of times it was funny. And I'll use Whitmer as an example. A few years ago, they had a lot of kids from the state championship football team that were on their basketball team, and they played Jerry Easter and Emmanuel Christian right down to the wire in a Christmas tournament game. And I think a lot of it comes back to feeding off when you're successful in other sports. You kind of say, well, we did it here. Why can't we do it on this field of play too?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Even our baseball kids going to the Final Four and then coming with us. It all translates for sure.
The defense, I know, again, like we said, a lot of guys playing both ways. What do you try and do to make sure that you keep guys as fresh as possible? Because it's not as big of a deal, I think, at this time as far as cramping, because the weather's not, but we talk about getting beat up and kind of being physically just exhausted after a while. What do you do to try and keep kids fresh throughout the week, and then also as you go through the end of a season?
We only have one full hitting practice. That's on Wednesdays. And I think last Wednesday, our practice was about an hour and 15 minutes. I mean, if we can get aligned, if we can know our assignments and everything's good, I'm not one that if we don't need 2 hours of practice, we're not going for 2 hours.
Yeah.
If we can get our work in, we're getting off the field. The other thing is in practice, We as a coaching staff kind of have the rule of pair and a spare. So we always need to make sure our spares are getting as much reps as the pairs that are on the field. And that definitely helps to limit the number of reps in practice. So obviously that guy can be ready on a Friday, but also kind of keep everybody's bodies fresh. The last one is we make sure that we lift. We try to maintain or gain strength during the season. So we lift 3 days a week. And just that mentality of being in the weight room, squatting during the season, and getting all the stuff in that we need to keep our joints and everything strong and healthy has been huge for us.
Well, and I think it also, again, when you talk about toughness, there is nothing harder, I imagine, after, even if it's just an hour and a half football practice, to have to go in and get any kind of circuit of weight training in on top of it. I mean, guys are tired, but as you kind of point out, to be able just to kind of stay where you need to be at, it's probably important just from a mental side as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, trust me, I'm no stranger to walking through the weight room and telling everybody they don't have enough weight on the bar. Everybody wants to take it easy at the end of practice or before practice or whatever. But, just seeing longevity-wise, other kids that are making it through the season. And, we've had those years where kids have gotten hurt. And most of our injuries are typically like ligament damage or something serious that's not a joint or, something muscular. So we've been very fortunate in that area to keep our kids healthy as long as possible.
Let's talk about this Buckeye division a little bit, because to me, in just a short amount of time, it's gone from, yeah, we think this might be really good, to having a 3-way tie for first place last year and then having another team right behind you guys as well. That division, I think, speaks to, if you can come out on the other side, even if you're sharing first place, if you can come out on the other side at the top of the mountain, that speaks to, A, how tough of a football team you have, but also how good of a football team you have, because the gauntlet that you have to go through, the 3 teams that are kind of opposite you out of those 4, really make it difficult to get a win. And you mentioned coming out of that Whitmer game last year, being a little bit beat up, and then having to go on the road and play Findlay, which you guys coincidentally have to do again this year. I look at it and I say, if you can come out of this division unscathed and have a winning record and be in first place, it just speaks to, A, how good you are, but also how tough you are.
Yeah. I won't be a stranger or a liar. I'll be honest with you. We read the Blade article this year when it came out on the coaches vote. We were voted 4th.
I know.
And I think our kids are a little bit upset about that. Like, wait, we finished tied for the league title last year and we're voted to finish 4th. But when you put into perspective, is anybody wrong to pick someone else? I don't know that they are, because it's a toss up between everybody at this point. And I think everybody in the top 3 or 4 teams in the coaches vote finished within a point of each other. And I think that just kind of goes to show the balance that we have, because, you talked about when we went and beat Findlay after losing to Whitmer last year. I had our kids convinced that if we beat Findlay, we can still be in it for the league championship, and we were. But that's what you want in a conference. You don't want it to come down to one game. And I'm not, say anything bad about anything else in our conference, but previously it'd be us and Perrysburg for 7 years straight of who was going to win the conference. Now it's pretty much a toss-up, because you don't know who's going to win on a Friday. You don't know how the whole season's going to go. So that makes it important. Whoever comes out on, on the losing end of this Anthony Wayne Whitmer game, there's still hope that you're going to win a league title. Or whoever comes out the Perrysburg Whitmer game or the Findlay Perrysburg, whatever. There's always that in the back of your mind. We got to keep playing every week, because there's still a chance someone's going to fall and we could win it. So that's what makes the league fun. That's what makes it special week to week.
Well, you hit on something, though, because I said the same thing after I saw what the preseason picks were. And I thought the same thing, because you guys had a lot of talent that came back. And I literally, you can ask anybody. I literally said, I cannot believe that team was picked 4th. And you're right. You can put all the team names in a hat and probably draw, and it could be just as accurate, and you can make a case for everybody to win. But like you said, to go through the trials and tribulations that you did, to have all the returning talent that you did, and to finish 4th or be picked 4th, obviously it's just a prediction. But I was surprised, just because of, as you said, what you guys accomplished, and then all of that coming back this year.
Hey, I'll tell you what, just so everybody knows, I vote for us to finish first every year. So.
Certainly can't send you the angry email. All right, fair enough.
And that's no respect. That's no disrespect to anybody else, but that's just the way it is. There's a ton of respect in our league for each other. It is a toss up. If nobody likes the narrative, they're in charge of changing it. So
that's fair.
Yeah, it's a fun league for sure. Very competitive.
Before I let you go, we definitely got to talk about the game on Friday. It's at your place. You're undefeated. Whitmer comes in 4-1. They've looked really impressive the last couple of weeks. What is some of the things that you've seen from Whitmer on film and kind of what you like about them, and then some of the keys that you feel like are going to be necessary in order for you guys to come out victorious on Friday?
Listen, anytime you turn on film about a team, you start asking yourself, what are they good at? You look at both their tackles, their offensive tackles, and honestly, their offensive line in general. But the two guys on the edges of that offensive line really stand out on film. I mean, they're big, they're physical, they got quick feet. That's going to be the number one challenge for us to stop. And, you know, what makes Whitmer special is once you can stop those guys and potentially stop the run, Brady Ford's got really incredible arm talent and some really good receivers that can really open up the offense on a deep threat. So anytime you have a team that's a dual threat that can be physical up front and can throw over the top, that makes it really difficult to defend. So, you know, first we have to stop the run. We have to play physical with that offensive line. And I don't know if you want to say it second, but the next thing you have to do is not give up any big plays.
Sure.
They like to throw posts. They like to throw 15-yard outs, and they're good at it because Brady Ford's got an incredible arm. But, you know, we have to try and make them one-dimensional if we can. But that starts with stopping that offensive line.
And I think you guys will have an atmosphere that'll certainly be something that your kids can feed off of. The one part about your stadium that I enjoy is it's still one of the more intimate venues, I think, in the league, where things are a little bit more compact. You do have 3-4 deep at the fence line. I mean, it'll be rocking on Friday night. I'm sure your guys will feed off of that because your fan base is also quite supportive as well.
Yeah, it is definitely a college atmosphere, and it's one that whenever I'm done coaching, I can't wait to just go be a part of. Whether it's tailgating in the parking lot, you know, BCSN is going to be there for their pregame stuff. Our marching band brings an incredible amount of support, and they're loud too. And it honestly makes it feel like a college football atmosphere. You know, I played at the University of Findlay, and I would say we're 3 or 4 times louder than being out there on a Saturday afternoon for Division II football. So it's definitely a personal environment. I don't think anybody can sit closer to the field anywhere else. And that just makes it exciting when you're on the field.
Last question before I let you go, because I have had a lot of coaches poo-poo this, and I'm curious what your thoughts are because you get to do this
All right,
5 times a year. Grass or turf, does it make a difference for guys? Everybody says no, but I feel like sometimes it does.
listen, it makes a difference. Don't let anybody lie.
All right, fair enough. Thank you.
It makes a difference.
Thank you.
Listen, we got to change our cleats. And we might be us and Otsego might be the only grass fields left around here. And I will tell you, it's funny. We watch from week to week when teams come out. Some kids will literally bend down and rub their hands in the grass and feel it and talk about it like they've never seen it before. And we get a kick out of that. So you add a crown, you add divots, you add all kinds of stuff. I also think, you know, we feel faster on turf.
Yeah.
When you're running the ball on grass, you cannot get away with cutting off your inside foot, right? On turf, you can cut off your inside foot. And that to me tells me that the surfaces are different and have to be played a little bit different. So it definitely changes how you cut, how you break, and what you wear on your feet.
And sometimes I do think it takes teams like a quarter to get used to that footing because, you know, having watched, you know, Whitmer play at Southview last year, and I'm sure you've seen that film as well. They looked like Bambi on ice a little bit trying to get their footing in that first quarter because it's just not something you're used to doing, and you slip and you get dew and all these different things. You mentioned the divots. I mean, it does make a difference. And you guys are one of the few that unfortunately have to do this week in and week out where you jump back and forth. I mean, I'm sure you're used to doing it by now, but a lot of teams aren't always used to doing it with you guys because, as you said, you're the only grass field in the area outside of Otsego.
Now, if you were asking the 5 previous coaches earlier in the year, I might argue August grass is not that bad.
Okay.
But fall grass, when it gets wet, it's different. So this Friday might be a little bit different than earlier in the year.
All right. Well, we'll have to wait and see. I
That's right.
appreciate the time, honestly. Again, I always enjoy talking with you, and best of luck to you the rest of the season. And I really appreciate you doing this tonight, Andy.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris.
All right. See ya. That's
Bye.
Andy Brungard, the head football coach of the Anthony Wayne Generals, joining us here on the NLL Weekly Podcast. Appreciate him, as always, for giving us a little bit of time. And you heard it here that he does feel that grass has an effect on teams that are used to playing on turf. So I'm not crazy, at least, as for those of you who have heard me say that multiple times. Our second guest is here, and he's going to help us break down Whitmer Anthony Wayne and the rest of the NLL slate this weekend. But before we do, want to say thank you to Victory Auto Mall, your trusted used car dealer in Toledo. Whether you're shopping for your first car or your 10th truck, their staff provides outstanding service in a no-pressure environment. The only goal, to provide you a great vehicle that matches your lifestyle and service you well for years to come. Victory has an established exemplary reputation in the community, and they are a buy here, pay here dealership. Top priority, helping you get the vehicle you want. Visit them in person, 1632 West Lasky Road. Call them 419-345-3603 or online, WeFinanceCarsToday.com. So thank you to Victory Auto Mall for making NLL Weekly possible. Let's bring in my good buddy, Justin Keller, who calls the games with me on Friday nights at Whitmer. Also was a coach, player for Whitmer. Thanks for joining us here again tonight. I know on short notice because I only gave you like 36 hours, so I apologize.
So much better than last time. But, at any rate, thanks for having me on, Chris.
I love talking with you because you and I have had always really good conversations about stuff, and you've just been in a lot of different arenas and in a lot of different environments. And we got a big one on Friday. And from the Whitmer perspective, it's a big one. From the Anthony Wayne perspective, it's obviously a big one. And it's funny because talking with Ken Winters the last couple of days, the division's going through the next 2 weeks. Whether Whitmer comes out of that 2-0 or whether they split that or whatever the case is, doesn't mean Whitmer doesn't have a chance, but the way that division shapes up is going to really be determined over the next 2 weeks, I think, for Whitmer.
Oh, especially being on the road. You know, you're asking to play Anthony Wayne, Perrysburg, Findlay on the road.
Yeah,
that's a tall task right there. And Whitmer playing well. They've had a couple running clocks.
Yeah.
So they've had it pretty easy the last couple of weeks. But it's going to be a challenge for them coming up these next couple of weeks for sure.
You and I talked about this on Friday. It felt like what we saw at Whitmer Memorial was maybe the most complete performance we've seen from these guys, I would say, in at least 5 or 6 years. And that doesn't necessarily denigrate what we saw in the past, but to see special teams, offense, defense, all clicking. We didn't see a lot of the undisciplined stuff. First time all year where we've seen Whitmer be not penalized as much as their opponent. We had 3 to Southview's 4. Just a lot of things went well on Friday. The two questions, obviously, you always have coming out of that: can you continue to do that? But then also, can you do that against better competition?
Well, that's the goal, and that's kind of the mantra, right? Get one day better. You're always looking to get one day better. And Whitmer, even though, let's say they had an easy one on, but they got one day better. Every facet of the game, like you said, special teams was fantastic. The worst special teams play they had was the opening kickoff.
Yeah.
Farhan kicks it down the middle instead of pinning it in the corner like he always does, right? Offensively, they, like you said, they were clicking on all cylinders. Defensively, they were outstanding the entire game. And the penalties. You limit those types of mistakes, and that's the improvement you're looking for in those types of games, right? Limit mistakes, limit the dumb penalties, play as perfectly as you can. You're never going to play perfectly. That's not realistic. But they played about as perfect as you could play.
When you look at a week like this, walk us through what's kind of being talked about in the locker rooms of Whitmer and Anthony Wayne, because the kids aren't deft to what's going on either. They understand that this is a big week. Next week's going to be a big week, obviously, because Anthony Wayne has to play Findlay, and not that Findlay's what we thought they were going to be because of Ryan being out, but still not an easy game. What is being said? What are the coaches focusing on in those locker rooms this week as far as trying to keep the kids locked in, but then also understanding that you don't want to put so much pressure on them that they come out and they're tight on Friday?
No, the kids aren't dumb, and they know whether you're playing a team that's 0-10 or you're playing a team like Anthony Wayne. I think a coach's approach has to be the same because the kids know what's at stake. And whether, like I said, you're playing for a league championship or it's playoff week, you have to approach the week the same, and then kind of monitor where your kids are at, right? If they're a little tense, they're a little high strung, you got to find a way to remind them it's just another game.
Yeah.
And remind them that their best is going to be good enough to win the game. And I think that has to be the emphasis. It's just You don't have to play above your ability. Your best is good enough to win the game.
When you guys were game planning for a game like this too, whether it had been Central or last year against Anthony Wayne and Perrysburg, how much are you adjusting stuff during the week? Obviously, you're adjusting things to match what another team's weaknesses are to kind of take advantage of those. But are you reinventing the wheel at all, or are you just kind of making sure that we're doing what we do well and we're going to continue to try and do what we do well?
No, I think at most you might throw in a couple different formations, a couple looks that they haven't seen. And all that is just a matter of getting guys lined up, right? And once the ball snapped, you're just running your offense. Maybe tweaking a route here or there, maybe adding a tag to a certain route to try to exploit something that the defense might be giving you. And then defensively, you got to find out what team strengths are, right? And you're gonna have to. It's a little. I love that meme. I don't know if you saw the meme. I wish I could pull up and show you where Pat McAfee and Saban, when he was dancing.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
There was a meme that and above Saban said defensive coordinators on game planning, and then offensive coaches game planning, right? And it shows McAfee dancing like a lunatic. But that's kind of how it is. Like, it's much more stressful to be a D coordinator, especially against a team like Anthony Wayne that can present so many problems.
But you didn't, from remembering, you weren't a guy though that would go in and. I don't want to sit there and say you didn't do anything, but I mean, you weren't a guy that would go in like the week of a big game and start drawing on the board and going nuts because you were always really good about, I know what we do well, especially at this point in the season. I mean, we're into week 6 now. If you don't know what you do well, you probably don't do anything well, but I do think that you were always really good about, I'm not going to, sure, tweaks, little adjustments here and there, but you're not going in where you're putting in, you don't look like Henry Winkler in The Water Boy, where you've got this notebook that you're flipping through to try and find the magical play, basically.
Right. I think the first thing I would try to do is identify who the team's best players are. Who's their best players on the front 7? Who's their best player on the back half? And then go from there. Because at the time, we would do certain things and, read certain guys. And my philosophy was, a lot of times, because we would read when we'd run, especially zone read stuff, we could read a down lineman, we could read a linebacker, or the backside end, which is pretty standard. And one of the things I always try to do, if that was part of our game plan, part of our package, for example, would be find their best guy and don't block them.
Sure.
If they had a stud up front, right? Well, why waste a guy trying to block him because he's going to lose? So let's just read him. Let's put him in conflict if we're going to have a hard time blocking him. Same thing with a linebacker that's super aggressive, that's going to flow to the ball. If we have the ability to read him, whether it's a quarterback pull or an RPO, let's use his speed and his aggressiveness to our advantage. And that's one of the things I would look for.
Let's focus on what you would be saying if you were working with your normal position of quarterbacks. Brady Ford had a terrific game last week. He's had quite a few terrific games in a row. Really, outside of that second half against Clay, we really haven't seen him do a whole lot of stuff that is uncharacteristic of basically what he's done, which is played really well this year. But there's always, I feel like last year, and I think you would agree with this, there was definitely going into that Anthony Wayne and Perrysburg stretch, there almost was a simplifying of the offense going into those games because of the running game maturing to what it was, but then also trying to make sure that you could limit mistakes. And the passing game probably wasn't where it needed to be going into this game to be as efficient as you'd liked it to have been. This year, that's going to be different, where you're going to see him take more of a role in the game planning, I think. What would you be saying to him going into a game like this? Because it does feel like, in a way, he's going to kind of determine whether or not Whitmer wins. Because, Andy Brungard basically said, we're going to try and take away something. My guess is they feel much better about trying to take away the run because you'd rather see if Brady can beat you throwing the ball. I have a feeling he's going to be kind of the key to whether or not Whitmer comes away victorious on Friday.
Brady's seen big games before. So just walking out there on the field on Friday night, he's been in that situation. He's a 3-year starter. So I think having that big game experience is going to be huge. And all he has to do is just keep doing what he's doing. Limit the number of mistakes and take what the defense gives you. I do think that last year, I know Anthony Wayne played a lot of 2 high safeties, which left a 7-man box for us. And I don't think Anthony Wayne was ready for a run game because I don't think people didn't see it up to that point.
No,
that was kind of Jaden Jones and Joey Morales' coming out party that game. And I think his game, and we hadn't proven to have much of a run game. So I think their philosophy was going in, we're going to keep everything in front of us. And then next thing you know, those 2 guys got loose. So Brady didn't have to do a lot in that game. And Coach Brungard said it, like they're going to have to decide what they're going to take away. I think any good coach you need to stop the run first. And that's what I expect to do. So I do expect to see some more 1 high safety looks from Anthony Wayne this week, which is going to present itself more opportunities for Brady.
Now, I'm sure you've watched a lot of Anthony Wayne film. What has stood out to you about them so far? And kind of, you had already kind of started watching them before the end of the game last week. You had said, what do you see from them, and what do you think they do really well?
Well, Kenny's a superstar. He really is. I'm really impressed with him, what he's able to do with his feet. And he's so deceiving too as a runner. I mean, rarely do you see a kid 6'4", kind of long and rangy like he is, have that kind of footwork and be able to lower his shoulders and move a pile forward. So he's really impressive running the ball. And I love the Gardner kid. Like he's a weapon, and I love the way they use him on the backfield. They try to hide him in different spots, and like it was the Napoleon game, I believe, where they kind of put him in a wing and he was able to split the safeties for a touchdown. They'll use him out of the backfield and find him. So he's a weapon, and those are the types of throws that Kenny's best at. I think he's come a long way. I mean, you can tell his passing game has developed quite a bit, but still, I don't think it's a guy that is going to drop back and pick teams apart.
No,
and spread them out. But they've done a good job of trying to do some play action, like I said, just opportunistic. So it's really important for Whitmer's defense to make sure they stay 3rd and longs and put them in throwing downs. Up front, really impressed with their guys up front. I think they have 3 starters on the offensive line returning.
Yep.
I think Lohmeyer, was hurt last year. Otherwise, he would have been the 4th, or I don't know, maybe one of those guys replaced him. But still, there's a lot of experience up front as well. So Anthony Wayne's going to want to control the ball. They probably have to. I didn't see the game from last week, but the Napoleon game, they're going to have to convert in the red zone a little better against Whitmer. They cannot come out empty in the red zone if they plan on beating Whitmer on Friday.
When you look at a team like Anthony Wayne, I texted this to you the other day. One of the things that would certainly, especially once you get to this point in the season, and I know Andy and his staff have done everything they can to kind of mitigate this, but when you run a lot of guys both ways and you're talking about playing 80 to 100 plays a game, depending on how many plays you see and how much guys have to play, it can take a toll as the season goes on. It's one of the reasons why, and you and I talked about 2 platooning last year a little bit, or last week, about what that means and the difference and all that stuff. How concerned would you be if you're on that staff of knowing, because Andy did say coming out of that game last year, they were beat up. How concerned would you be again this week, knowing that you've got a lot of guys going both ways and you're hoping that you just come out of this healthy, but Whitmer's got some big boys and they've got a lot of players who are going to be a little bit fresher come 3rd and 4th quarter?
Well, the weather is supposed to be relatively mild, I believe. So that helps Anthony Wayne. And then, schools like Whitmer and Anthony Wayne, it's still relatively early in the season, right? I mean, they have playoff aspirations. They want to make deep playoffs runs. So when you take that into consideration, it's relatively early. I don't think it has the effect week 6 as it does week 11.
Okay.
You guys' legs start to get tired. The problem though is if you have a 2-way starter and you lose a guy. That's really losing two
Right.
positions.
Yeah.
You really lost two guys there.
Yeah.
Right. So that's an issue, I think, more than anything else. I think, watching some film, I think they do a great job of trying to get guys rest and spelling guys. And you see running backs going in and out. And the one thing I noticed, and I'm sure it wasn't by accident, Napoleon was in that game for a while. Napoleon played really well, by the way. Really impressed with, some of the guys on that roster. But there wasn't a lot of design runs for Kenny in that game. Not a lot. There wasn't a lot until they needed them. And then it was a little bit tighter at halftime. I think than they anticipated, and then they had to call his number a few more times. But even just the way they used him, because they probably could have ran him a lot more in that first half, and probably gone into halftime up 3 touchdowns. But they were really good in conserving his legs, the number of hits and shots that he's taken.
When you look at some of the other teams before, we'll talk about this game a little bit more in depth here in a moment. But when you look at some of the other teams, you mentioned Napoleon. It was funny this week when they were talking about who's going to come out on top. And you've now seen 2 of the teams in Clay and Southview in person. And obviously you've seen Napoleon on film. It amazes me that the team that wasn't mentioned out of those 3 teams, and Clay's really good. Southview, we both talked about, felt like they have a good shot if they can kind of correct a few things. But that Napoleon team maybe feels like the best out of those 3. And it's probably really tight. And you could probably flip a coin on maybe who wins it. But to not have their name mentioned, especially with the way that they play and how tough they've played the better competition on their schedule this year, they feel like, to me, a real threat to win that Cardinal division. And not only that, but I don't want to say it won't be close, but they feel like they could be a team that kind of just runs their way to a championship with how tough, physical, and just aggressive they are running the football.
Yeah, and Espinoza, he made some really impressive throws in that game. He had a couple interceptions, but I was really impressed with him. Eggers is a hard running, he runs hard. The wide receiver, the name escapes me now. Number
Rubenstein?
3. What is it?
Trey Rubenstein?
Yes. Yeah. He's very impressive as well. I was looking at that Cardinal division, like you said, Clay, Napoleon, Bowling Green, and like you said, Southview. Once they establish some identity on what they want to do offensively, in my opinion, they could be right in the hunt. But that Napoleon Clay game, and I don't know what week that is.
I think it's 8.
Is it?
I think it's 8 or 9. Yeah,
that'll be a fun game to watch. I'm looking forward to seeing the outcome of that one.
Did the Clay Perrysburg game, the final score ended up being 35-7, which that I don't think is overly surprising. But was it surprising to you that Clay's defense only had allowed the 15 points at halftime and that they were only down to score at the break? Obviously, holding Clay in check offensively is a feat for Perrysburg's defense, but that was a little bit closer at halftime than I thought, which might lead you to think that Clay has fixed some things defensively. Whitmer put up 45 against him, and it was 41 of those, 31 of those or whatever it was, were up at halftime. So it really does change the way you look at a game when you're only down 15-7 versus 31-0 or whatever it was in our game.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to watch that one yet, but you're right. Like, I don't know what is more impressive, or the 7 points that Perrysburg was able to hold them to, or Clay's defense improving. If I'm Whitmer right now, I probably pulled that. If I was on the staff right now, I would have already watched that game. Wondering how the heck they held the Heinzel and that receiving crew to only 7 points. But no, you're right. Like, I was super surprised by the halftime score, and really surprised that Clay was only able to muster up 7 points.
Findlay 21-7 over Fremont Ross. Not necessarily the particulars of that game, but to me, the funny thing is trying to keep a freshman and riding that wave of bringing a freshman in. And 1 week he throws for a school record 500 plus yards and a loss. And then last week they gear everything down and it's a 21-7 game over Fremont Ross, who again, the week before Whitmer pretty much put up 38 and could have named their score. It really pulled the dogs off early in that second half. you've worked with a freshman quarterback. I think he was related to you. You deal with a lot of that ebbs and flows of understanding that there are going to be flashes of brilliance, but there's also going to be a lot of leaner games where you're going to maybe have to grind one out. What do you do with a freshman quarterback in that situation?
Well, the good thing is they got the win.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing you have to hang your hat on. Like, you can throw for 500 yards every game, but if you're going to come off with a loss, what's the it doesn't matter. So to be able to walk away from a 2-touchdown victory and still have things to work on, things to improve. There's going to be mistakes. I mean, you're going through growing pains no matter what, but to be able to fix some of those growing pains coming off after a win is really important, especially for the confidence, right? Because I mean, he just has to go out and manage a game, do what he's asked to do. I'm sure they're trying. Obviously it sounds silly to say because he threw for 500 yards in one game, but not do too much. But but at the same time, you don't want to put all the pressure on that kid to go out and win games by himself. And that was something you're expecting Ryan Montgomery to do, right? That's not fair.
And that was something that you really focused on when Riley was a freshman, I think, was also trying to make sure that he didn't feel as though he had to go out and carry the team that year per se, where you had other offensive playmakers on the field that running back wise could break the game open. And it wasn't like he had to feel like, if I make a mistake here, if I don't make this play, we're going to lose because I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. It's very important to have the psyche of a freshman quarterback. And to be fair, the situations are a little different because I do believe that Riley planned on seeing some of the field regardless. There was always, at least even if he wasn't the starter, he was going to split time with Shue Sanders. But Landon Eckleberry had no designs of being on the field as a freshman at quarterback. But I do think that you really tried to focus on making sure that he never felt like, I have to carry this team in order for us to win.
Well, first of all, his goal, he was going to get on the field as our long snapper.
There you go. That's
So he was.
Everybody thought.
That was his goal, was to be the long snapper, which unfortunately he did do both for a while, which is exactly what you want, right?
For sure.
Go long snap after you go 3 and out.
Yeah.
No, but listen, you talk about being extremely fortunate with Riley's situation. When you have Malik Moore and Larry Patterson in the backfield running the ball, right? And now all of a sudden teams have to make that decision. You're going to leave a safety. You're going to leave 1 high or 2 high safeties because then you got Nick Witcher on the outside as well. So you want to go 1 high. Well, we'll just, our freshman quarterback is at least good enough to get Nick Witcher the ball. Yeah. If you want to stay too high, we got 2 dynamic running backs to hand it off to. So he was in a perfect situation to have to play as a freshman. I was very fortunate for that. And, when you get to throw it up to Nick Witcher, it gives you a lot of confidence too.
But I would imagine too, like it was important to make sure that he kind of played within himself and not felt like, I have to win this game or I have to press the issue in order for us to win.
No, I don't think that his freshman year, no, he was never in that situation. In the one game he was, I mean, he answered. Unfortunately, we lost to Central that year. I think he had, 4 touchdown passes in that game and battled and competed his tail off. But, that wasn't going to be enough to beat them that year with Michael Warren at running back. But there was very few situations where, unlike in 17, we gave him the ball and said, hey, you got to go win this one for us.
Yeah. Last question before we preview the week. Northview right now has not won a game. And I know this is not a position that you've been in a whole lot, but if I put you in that locker room and you haven't won a game yet, and let's face it, with the way that the Buckeye division is, you might be looking at, there's only really one realistic winnable game left on the schedule. What are you working on? What are you telling guys in a locker room when things aren't going well? Because while we've never necessarily been where we've been 0-5 going into a week 6 game, there have been times, 13 to be exact, where things were not going well, or at least well to what Whitmer standards are. And it is hard to keep kids engaged and focused. So what do you, in your mind, what did you guys do that year to try and keep kids in the mix, mentally focused, and understand that there's still 5-6 games left to keep going, compete?
Well, again, I haven't watched a lot of Northview, but I do know they're really young.
Mhm.
I know they have a couple sophomores, a lot of underclassmen playing right now, and I think the focus again just has to go back to just getting one day better. And I'm sure the coaching staff over there has realistic expectations going in week to week. And I'm sure when they roll into Perrysburg and Whitmer and Anthony Wayne and Finley, there's some realistic expectations there, and I'm just looking for guys to get better.
Sure.
And I'm trying to love up those guys and try to give them confidence, and just then I'm just preaching, keeping them engaged, like you said, keeping them trying to enjoy the game because it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough when you're going through that, but making sure you're loving those guys up and making sure they're getting better and coach them up because, like I said, they're pretty young, and you want to keep those guys engaged and part of the program and give them goals to shoot for down the road.
All right, let's bring Dan back in here because Dan's going to basically go down the list of games, and we're going to bounce back and forth on kind of what you and I think are going to happen. We don't have to necessarily pick winners, but just kind of like what we think some of the keys are to the game. And I know that you haven't necessarily seen every one of these teams, but I think we're far enough in that we have an idea of what each of them are. So I'll toss it over to Dan.
Thank you. And you guys were talking just a little bit ago about the Cardinal division, so let's get started over there, and we'll start with the odd team out of the 5-team division. As Southview looks to start their rebounding after a tough loss to Whitmer a week ago, they welcome in the Scott Bulldogs at 1-4. Not to demean the Bulldogs, but this does definitely feels like a chance for Southview to get their legs back underneath them and get ready to go and kind of sprint their way directly into the Cardinal division race.
Yeah, this feels like to me one of those where, and I'm curious how you would feel about this, Jot, but like you want to go out obviously and get off to a good start. But the nice part is you probably got beat up a little bit last week. If you could draw up the ideal scenario coming out of that game to be able to go and have a week where your starters can play, you could probably, if you need to hold a guy or two out because of that Cardinal division stretch that you got coming up, this is one where if you can get in, get out early and focus on getting some of that depth in, just health would be my number one concern is let's get in, let's get out. And then let's also make sure that we can keep guys ready because again, even though we've talked about the Buckeye division being a grind, they're going to probably see the Cardinal division as a grind as well.
Oh, I'm sure they will. And I spoke to Southview earlier, like establishing, and I really do. I think they need to establish some identity in what they want to be offensively because I think there's a lot of good pieces there. I think MacArthur's a great running back between the tackles. Will Mays is extremely athletic, and just putting those guys in position to be able to make plays. But this is a great week to do it, and you can do both, right? You can go out there and make a statement the first half, and then hopefully if you're, you can get those guys out of there and rest them up for the Cardinal division.
Bowling Green opens up Cardinal division play with a tough matchup on the road as they have to head up to Clay. And you talked about Clay a little bit ago, and I think you already kind of said exactly what it's going to take the Bobcats to win this one is they're going to need to keep the Clay offense off the field as much as they can, and that will likely be achieved with their dominant rushing game.
Yeah, I think you have to control the clock in this one because if you don't, you want to keep the ball in Mason Heinchel's hands as long as possible, eat as much clock as you can. The biggest question I have for BG is can their corners stay in front of guys like Hazuda and Byers? That is going to be maybe the toughest test for Bowling Green that they've had so far this season. And the other part of it too is even if you keep the ball in Mason Heinchel's hands for 10 minutes, it only takes them a minute and a half sometimes to score. That's how dynamic that offense is. To me, and again, Judd, you can say how you feel, but I feel like you got to win the battle at the line of scrimmage if you're Bowling Green. Like you have to be able on both sides of the ball, get some pressure on Heinchel. We know he can spin and do everything he can to get out of that pressure. But if you can control the line on both sides, it feels like BG's got a shot there just to be able to control the tempo and control the pace.
Well, Dan, you hit the nail on the head too. You pound the ball. Bowling Green's strength is probably Clay's weakness, and that's stopping the run defensively, in my opinion. If they're able to, and I would just get in 4-minute offense from the opening kickoff, right?
Yeah.
Just kind of work the clock. take as much as a play clock as you can, because that's going to be Bowling Green's best defense, and there's not a whole lot scheme wise you're going to be able to do to slow those guys down, in my opinion. So keeping their offense on the field with their ground attack, they should be able to, work as much clock and keep the kid off the field as much as possible.
And I imagine the more we talked about this a lot too, with keeping ahead of the chains too, because BG cannot afford to be in 3rd down and 9, 3rd down and 8. They have to be 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4 consistently or less in order to really have a chance, because that's just not an area that a team who runs the football can really afford to be in consistently.
No, and they have to limit penalties too. That's the other key. Is like if you're going to go in and you think you're just going to run the ball the entire game, inevitably there's going to be a holding penalty. There's going to be a false start. There's going to be something like that that's going to put you in 1st and 15, 2nd and 15, and you got to find ways to overcome that. So they're going to have to limit those sorts of mistakes as well if they plan on keeping Clay's offense off the field.
The Toledo Rockets would agree. Finally, over in the Cardinal division, Napoleon hits the road to take on Fremont Ross. And, I look at this and it feels like a toss-up, but it also feels like one of those good old-fashioned games that will be decided in the trenches. And it'll be up to who can control the line of scrimmage, much like it was when Whitmer was there 2 weeks ago.
I'll let you go first on this one, Jet.
Yeah, after watching Napoleon's defense and what they did against Anthony Wayne, I think they have enough defensively to shut down Fremont's offense and enough weapons on offense to, take advantage of some big play opportunities. I'm sure there'll be big play opportunities for him. I kind of like Napoleon in this one. But at the same, it's at Fremont?
Yes.
At Fremont. So, that's going to be difficult. We talked about the troubles you always have at Don Paul Stadium.
Yeah.
And their longest travel, I believe that's
absolutely
a long bus ride for him as well. So, if they're able to get there and get their bearings, I do like Napoleon in this one, just based on some of the weapons they have and, based on what they did defensively against Anthony Wayne.
But I think it comes back to what you said, which is Fremont Ross's offense. I mean, you talked about Southview finding identity, and Zaylen Harris, I'm hoping he's back for them at this point. I'm not 100% sure if he played last week, but if you're not going to have him again, what are you offensively? And it felt like in the game that we did, and granted, Whitmer's defense is good. Like, I don't want to dismiss that out of hand, but it felt like Fremont Ross didn't really know what they were without Zaylen Harris on the field. And that's tough when you take your best player off, clearly, but there didn't seem to be a whole lot of extra of what are we without Zaylen Harris on the field. And if Fremont Ross wants to be able, they're going to have to be able to move the ball efficiently, because you just said it, Napoleon's going to run the football and they're going to take time off the clock, period. That's what they do. I just really wonder offensively, what is Fremont? I don't know what they do well outside of Zaylen Harris. And I don't know that we've seen it enough to say, or be confident enough to say, like, well, they could win that game. Now, they did last year, and it kind of came out of nowhere that they won that game at Napoleon last year. I think everybody was stunned because people just assumed with a Fremont Ross team that had only won a game going in, well, what are they going to do? And then they end up beating Napoleon by 2 touchdowns. So that was the only Cardinal division loss outside of Southview that Napoleon had. I look at that game and I just wonder, who is Fremont Ross as far as their offensive game is concerned at this point?
Well, Harris would have made a huge difference in the Whitmer game.
Sure.
Again, I don't think it would have resulted in a Fremont win. Don't get me wrong, but they were on first down. They'd run the ball and they were 2nd and 12.
Yeah.
They couldn't establish. They did not have very many successful first down plays, which really put them in a bind, because now you're asking that first year quarterback to make plays against that Whitmer defense. And now he's getting sacked, and now they're 3rd and 16 and they're throwing it again. So it just kind of snowballed for them. So it was really hard for them to establish anything without that run game. And I think missing Harris hurt. Now Harris will be the X factor against Napoleon. So again, if they can get themselves in good 2nd down situations, it could be a different story.
And I think the one stat that kind of stood out to me more than anything last week was when you look at what the Findlay defense had let up the week before. Granted, Mason Heinchel and Carson Caden are not clearly the same quarterback, but the fact that Findlay's defense only allowed 7 points in that game, maybe they figured something out defensively, or maybe Fremont Ross still is kind of stuck in neutral offensively and trying to figure out what to do without Zaylen Harris, or what are they offensively if they can't run the football.
Yeah, it would definitely be interesting to see. I think, like I said, Napoleon, I think, has such a – they know who they are. We're talking about known identity. I mean, there's no question Napoleon knows who they are. I watched one game of them. I mean, they know who they are. And like I said, I think, especially after last year, they're going to come in there with a chip on their shoulder as well, I'm sure.
Tyler Swery might turn you into a triple option fan before we know it.
No, I've had enough of that. I'm good.
Well, since you guys mentioned Findlay's defense, it kind of brings up what I want to bring up as they take a trip over to McCord Road to take on Springfield after picking up, as you mentioned, that hard-fought win over Fremont Ross. Heading over to face a team that is coming off of their best offensive performance of the season. The question is that Findlay defense up to the task of slowing down a Springfield offense that finally may be just kicking itself into gear?
Yeah, they scored 26 last week against Napoleon. Coming into this game, they're averaging 13 points a game. Findlay's allowing 34 points a game. And I do think Findlay, I would probably pick them as the favorite, but Springfield has athletes, and we've seen that a couple of times this year. They just haven't been able to score. And obviously that's the name of the game. I don't think I'm saying anything earth-shattering there, but when you are allowing 34 points a game defensively, your opponent is anyway, you have to go in thinking we've got to be able to score points on this defense, or if we can't, then we've got a problem offensively. And just what I've seen from Springfield, I do think they've got some playmakers. Can they be organized and disciplined enough to do it for 48 minutes? Probably not. But I look at this team and think Findlay has to use this as a week where you're probably not going to see the level of organization and discipline and players skill-wise at all the different positions. But when you are taking on Anthony Wayne, when you are taking on a Perrysburg or a Whitmer, you're getting at least a glimpse of some of the talent that they will have, or similar talent. And you have to be able to keep Springfield in check offensively. Most teams have done that to this point. I don't think Findlay's going to have too much trouble doing it, but the last thing you want to do is allow Springfield to go in and score, 30 points in that game and have to win like 45-30 because you couldn't stop them.
I think coming off that week that Springfield's offense had, last week, I think should be good for their confidence. I mean, to have that game and if I'm Springfield staff, that's what I'm hanging my hat on, and showing these guys hey, this is what you're capable of doing. These are the numbers. This is what this team's giving up defensively every week in points, and kind of building off that to kind of, build up their confidence a little bit. And like I said, Findlay's kind of an enigma. They really are.
I know.
I mean, they really are. And I almost feel like that year to year. I mean, they always, they get blown out when you're expecting them to win, and then, but so it's hard to tell. I mean, we're talking about 16, 17-year-old kids too. So,
but I look at that, and this because there were years at Whitmer where defense was not great. And, I look at some of those years where, to me, there's nothing more demoralizing in a way if you're on a defensive staff, when you win a game, but again, the score is like, 45-35 or 52, 42 or so. I mean, those are the ones where it's like, we shouldn't have to. I mean, if you're playing against a really good team, fine. But if you're playing against a team that we would say is an average to above average offense, and you're giving up 50 some or 40 some odd points, offensively, you feel great because you put up 50, but defensively, you got to go, man, I know we won, but eventually we're going to run into somebody where they're not going to give up 50 points, and we're going to have to figure out how to hold a team under 40. I think there's that demoralizing feeling too, if you're Findlay, where if you can't stop these guys, good luck against Perrysburg, Anthony Wayne, and Whitmer at this point.
Yeah, because with the inexperience they do have at the quarterback position, you're not going to be able to outscore, the top teams in that division if you're Findlay.
Yeah.
And finally on the schedule, all right, forget it. Let me just get the hype train rolling. Clearly, not just because it's our game, but the game of the week in the conference. As the 4-1 Whitmer Panthers, going in ranked 4th in Division 1, Region 1, head out to Anthony Wayne at a perfect 5-0, also ranked 4th in Division 2, Region 6. You guys talked quite a bit already about both of these teams. So the question, I guess, coming into this is going to be, whose momentum overcomes the other, really? Can Whitmer keep doing what they've been doing since that week 2 loss to Central, or is it Anthony Wayne that just continues to roll?
I'll let you start, Jeff.
Well, I think watching Anthony Wayne, it's important for Whitmer's defense to have that bend but don't break mentality, not give up the big plays. And Gardner definitely has some breakaway speed where if he gets that second level, he can take it to the house at any time. So you have to eliminate those plays. They have to be aware of the play action, kind of like the throwbacks, the tailback, those types of big plays. I don't see Anthony Wayne, I don't see Kenny dropping back. And like I said, throwing a post over the top on first down or anything crazy like that, but they have to keep everything in front of them. And, I kind of go back to watching that in a point game, and we've talked, and, you get in the red zone, things get really, really tough.
Sure.
And Whitmer is big and athletic enough to where they can, they'll be able to hold off, or at least be able to get a goal line stand or be able to do what Napoleon did against Anthony Wayne. So it's really important for them, I think, to go in that mentality. Don't worry about how many yards you're giving up. Don't worry about how many yards of carry Kenny has. Keep everything in front of you. Bend but don't break. And then, offensively for Whitmer, someone's going to have to answer the bell, like we said. And Coach Brungard said it. They're going to take something away. If they take away the run game, Brady Ford's got to be ready to go. That group, the talented receiving corps has got to be ready to go they got to be able to make plays. And because I think, they'll be able to take advantage of Anthony Wayne if they stay one high. I think they're skilled enough to do it. But Anthony Wayne, year in, year out, has that mentality too. I mean, they don't give up many big plays. So it's going to come down, really probably to red zone opportunities. Who's going to be able to get points, not just points, but touchdowns when they get in the red zone. I think that's what the game will come down to.
I look at too, you mentioned trying to kind of bend but don't break, but where if they can keep Anthony Wayne in second and long, third and long consistently, and I think we saw that last year, that was really where the general struggle, because Kenny, as good as he has gotten, is not a traditional drop back, stand in the pocket for 5 seconds to let a pass play develop. They don't have the receivers to do that either. They're young at receiver. They don't have a lot of experience there. Win Sharp, who Andy said is playing really well at Bowling Green, he was their big play target in the passing game. You obviously can sneak guys out of the backfield, but if you can keep Anthony Wayne in that second and long, third and long, keep him behind schedule, that's going to help that Whitmer defense a ton, because I don't know how you feel, Jeff, but the way the secondary has played for Whitmer thus far into the season, it's one of the better secondary performances I've seen, and the talent there, the athleticism that's there between, Cam Burton, and we've seen, Davion Sanders and a bunch of guys, Chucky Isom, Ty Davis, those guys athletically, I would put them up against the Anthony Wayne receivers of being able to stay in front of them and not necessarily give up any big plays behind. So if you can keep them behind the chains, I think that's a big thing. The other part is, and this is where Whitmer, to me, has struggled in some of these games in the past. I think they kind of got away with it a little bit last year, but you cannot go in and be undisciplined. That was what was so impressive to me last week, was the discipline that we saw. Only 3 penalties in the game. And you look at Southview had the 4. I don't know that it's been a long time, and you can certainly remind me if there's a different one, Justin, but I can't remember the last time we were only penalized 3 times in a game. I mean, it does not happen a whole lot. And the fact that we were able to not only play well, but play clean and have an opportunity to not be in first and long, second and long because of a hold or because of a personal foul or whatever the case was, that changed the way that they played last week as well. Because when Whitmer's in 3rd and 3, they're a lot more dangerous than when they're in 3rd and 9. And I look at that discipline piece, something that at Central early on in that game, totally understand it's a different type of game, but the pressure is going to be the same. When you are putting yourselves in those positions of being 2nd and 25, that really makes it hard to move the football. There aren't a lot of teams that can pick up 2nd and 25. And that to me is where, if they can be disciplined, because it's going to be a tough environment. Not that Whitmer hasn't faced that, but it's going to be a tough crowd. That stadium is unlike any other stadium in the area, not to mention the grass, but just how intimate it is. People are kind of on top of you. It's loud. That's going to be a game where you have to be ready for a hostile environment, and you have to be able to keep a level head in those moments, because if you don't, you're going to lose the game really quickly if you give Anthony Wayne free yards.
Well, no disrespect to Whitmer's previous opponents, but the one thing that Anthony Wayne will not do is take a bunch of chances on first down. I mean, they know exactly who they are, and they're gonna run the ball on first down. And again, when you have Kinney and Gardner, I mean, they're gonna find themselves. They're not gonna find themselves in 2nd 11, 2nd and 12, or giving up sacks. They're gonna find themselves in decent second down. Because they're not going to take, because they know who they are. And again, when you have those two guys, well, they have several guys that run the ball, but but at the same time, they don't throw the ball a lot on first down. Again, they try to set themselves up in 2nd and short, and then try to set some big explosive plays up through their run game. So I don't expect, unless Whitmer blitzes into some things and is able to get a big stop, but it's going to have to happen with the run defense.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see, like I said, if you can keep them in 3rd and long because you've shut down the run on 1st and 2nd down. Again, 3rd and 8 was a lot harder for them to pick up last year, just because that's not how they're built offensively, basically.
Yeah, no, I went back and looked too. I think when they were 3rd and 7 or 4th and 7, when they went for it on 4th down, I think they were like 2 of 9 maybe, and one of them they fell short of the sticks on 3rd down. The other one they completed was a pass back to Kinney. They threw for a touchdown late in the game on 4th down. So last year they struggled when they were in those situations. At least throwing the ball, they struggled.
And as far as discipline angle, not to kind of harp on that too much, but that does feel like in big games when we talked about, and this is the same for Anthony Wayne. Like, I don't want to make it just seem like Whitmer has to be the only one that's disciplined and Anthony Wayne can do whatever they want. But that's, if you want to get to the level that both of these teams aspire to get to, you cannot be in situations where, and you talk about that hidden yardage game where you're just giving away yardage because of stupid penalties, undisciplined penalties. One thing to make it out of aggression, but it's the after the play stuff. It's the mental errors. Like, those are things you just can't afford to do in a game like this.
Yeah. And again, this take nothing away from Whitmer and Coach Winters and the staff. The 3 penalties, that was awesome to see last week. And even the most disciplined team, if they come out of the game with 3 penalties, I think any coach would be happy with that, even the most disciplined team. The difference, though, is going to be there's more at stake in this game. Whitmer was in control of that game from the get-go, and so those emotions aren't running as high. You already talked about the atmosphere there, how intimate the stadium is. So it's going to be loud. Emotions are going to be, riding high. So to be able to control those emotions, because quite frankly, that's where the penalties come from, right? Because it's such a big game, because it's so loud, because guys are so amped up. That's when you jump off sides, right? That's when you have the late hits. That's when you have those personal foul penalties. So to be able to keep their emotions in check, they're going to have to do that if they want to replicate the penalties or lack of penalties they had last week.
You mentioned emotions in check. Are you going to be able to keep your emotions in check Friday night?
Is that because of the Central game? Are you bringing up the Central game? Is that why?
You were out of control that now. Let's be honest. No. But I mean, in those moments, and you've coached, that feeling, those emotions. I mean, it's hard to wait for Friday. I mean, these are the ones where if you're in that locker room, whether you've got a jersey on or you got a headset on, you just wish it were Friday already at this point, I imagine.
Yeah, I think as a coach, that's the biggest challenge. I mean, you game plan, you scheme, but at the end of the day, you are who you are. You know, you're a team the caliber of Anthony Wayne and Whitmer. Like I said, you know what you're good at, you know what you're not. You've game planned. You know all that stuff's the job of the coaching staff. Come Friday is just to make sure everyone does keep those emotions in check. You know that you don't make a bigger. You try. I don't want to say you downplay the game. You know, because that's ridiculous. But at the same time, you just got to remind them, like, this is just another game. And like I said earlier, you know, your best is going to be good enough.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I would tell my team that if it was if we were playing St. Ed's or, you know, we were playing I don't know, like you know, 0-10 team, you know, I would just, your best is good enough. Don't do more than you need. Don't do more than you're capable of doing.
Well, we will be doing everything that we're capable of doing on Friday. Pregame, 6:30. The Car Stereo One Panther tailgate kicks off with the 6:30 on Q105, and then kickoff at 7 from Schaller Memorial Stadium. I'm really excited for this one. I'm glad to, again, have you on the call with me, Dan on the call with us as well. We missed Dan last week. I said Ken Winters would have had nothing but glowing things to say at halftime and postgame last week, and Dan missed it. He
would have been easy to find.
Yeah, I think Ken would have been looking for Dan last week instead of the other way around. So, but Justin, thanks for the time. We'll see you on Friday, man.
Thank you.
All right, that was Justin Keller, the voice with me on Friday nights on Whitmer broadcasts on Q105, and former Whitmer coach and former Whitmer player, and really excited to have him on the call, as I've said several times. Just so knowledgeable about the game, which is why we like having him on as many times as we do. Again, one more time, 6:30 pregame on Q105.5, and then kickoff at 7 o'clock as well. So really excited for that. If I could see so I make sure I hit all of the venues where they can get this podcast. So again, you can watch or listen to it on Spotify, iHeart, Pandora, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Spreaker, and Podcast Addict, and fingers crossed, Apple at some point here.
I don't want to break anything, but I think I may have cracked that nut.
All right,
tonight.
We'll see.
Hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be able to add one to the list. We'll pray
at the altar of Steve Jobs tonight, and hopefully he will grant us our wish. So make sure that you check us out there if you weren't able to listen to the entirety of the show. Thanks to Andy Brungard. Really do appreciate him joining us. Looking forward to stepping on the field and just saying hello before the game. Thanks to Justin Keller. Always appreciate his time. And again, a guy that we both have grown to admire, me over several years, but I know you've even been super impressed with how great of a guy he is as well. So just happy to have him aboard this year. So again, thanks to those guys. Thanks to you for listening at home. Make sure you tune in next week. NLL Weekly Podcast, week number 7. We're going to try and have Dirk Connor from Perrysburg on, and we'll see. Maybe we'll try and get Mason Lowry, BCSN, back with us as well. So we will do that next week. So until then, have a great weekend. We'll see you in week number 7. Bye-bye, everybody.